Welcome, Crest members. This is part one in a 10-part series entitled Commercial Invoicing Explained. What we're going to do over the next 10 sessions is consolidate and trim down something that usually takes days in a class and has cost hundreds of restorers thousands of dollars over the past few years to get all the information necessary to properly invoice using time and materials over Xactimate. Our goal here is to give you all the information that coordinates with all of your other Crest training so that you can be a great time and materials invoicer. Let's get started on part one, which is kind of what I would call an introduction to the concepts involving time and materials. It's easy as A, B, C, and D. Let's start with all the sides of a commercial claim. On a residential claim, there's usually three parties. There's the homeowner, there's us, and there's an adjuster. Well, look at this list here. This is just a partial list of all the different parties that can be on a commercial claim. We can acknowledge, and we may have seen a bunch of these guys on our own projects on the residential side in the owner category. Obviously, once in a while, we'll run into contents contractors, recon contractors, even some, residents who want to do some of their own work. Well, on a commercial side, you'll get in-house staff. For instance, many times if there's a loss in a hotel, the hotel management will use their staff to help empty out the rooms to make it easier for you guys to get to your work. Also on the owner side, you'll have people like public adjusters, owners, consultants that may be hired by various commercial clients. You'll have risk managers in the case of hospitals or large, many multiple property situations with companies. They may have a risk manager that assesses the risk throughout the entire company and throughout the entire portfolio of properties. You also have the commercial broker or agent who may have a lot of information about the policy, and they will be involved in the claim. On the carrier side, here's where you see the biggest difference, and here's why this class is very vital. We usually go ahead and we start in and we just deal with an adjuster. Well, take a look here. Many times you're going to get a field adjuster who's going to show up to the loss, but he's going to realize very shortly that it's way, way over his head, and he's going to pass it on to what they call a large loss adjuster. You'll hear terms like general adjuster, executive general adjuster. Those would be the guys that fall into the category of large loss adjusters. You may also run into an independent adjuster, or you may run into what they call a TPA. Now, this TPA is a little different in its activities than a TPA program that many of you might be, interested in, involved with, or at least have an understanding of. A third-party administrator on the commercial side truly is an independent company who is responsible for gathering all the data on a corporate claim every time they have one. Let me explain this in a way that you can understand. For residential losses, most times there's a deductible for the loss, and then we figure out what that is, and we go ahead and we take care of the loss. While on commercial policies, many, many times they'll have a very, very large deductible, and it'll be what they call an aggregate deductible. So maybe a hotel might have 10 different hotels involved in one insurance policy, and the owner might have an aggregate deductible of $1 million, meaning before the policy takes any effect, he's got to incur $1 million of losses over the course of one calendar year or one policy year. Well, the TPA is going to be the guy who's going to take all of the paperwork from each loss. Maybe the first loss is 200,000. Maybe the second loss at a different property in that calendar year is 300,000. Well, the TPA is responsible for consolidating that paperwork and kind of keeping track for the insurance company and for the property owners and policyholders where they stand heading towards that deductible. All right, there's a lot more to talk about in terms of TPAs, but just understand that they are part of the process and they're a very important part of the process. You'll also have reinsurers. Once again, when policies get very large, the insurance companies look to lay off some of that risk. So they'll go out and they'll sell some of their risk to what they call reinsurers. If anybody's ever heard of Warren Buffett, many of his companies that he owns are insurance companies, but they're actually reinsurance companies. They take the risk away from some of the carriers that you may have heard of. You'll also get insurance consultants that'll be on board. Depending on the size of the loss, you might have industrial hygienists, depending on the type of loss, and you'll have auditors looking to make sure that all the paperwork is documented properly. Know where you stand. A restoration company's invoice usually is less than 20% of the overall amount of the claim on a commercial job, but just understand that we account for over 80% of the problems in this claim. That's a fact that's been handed down to me anecdotally, but I've also done the research on it. And when I say 80% of the problems, I don't mean 80% of the dollar problems. I mean 80% of the time taken up by these TPAs and by the insurance companies, the auditors, and their experts in trying to get to the bottom of our invoices. Most of it occurs because we have a mentality where we don't understand how to invoice properly, and we don't understand how to make their jobs easier to pay us. Here's the main reasons why we don't get paid and why we cause problems. Number one, contractor did more than he was supposed to do. Number two, I'm using numbers, but B, the contractor's pricing is too high. C, the contractor never gave us updates of his progress. And D, the contractor can't prove his charges. We may have heard one or more of these different arguments on the residential side, but they're really easy to solve on the residential side because all we usually have to do is just provide a little bit more information. While on the commercial side, every time we cause a delay, it's really going to hold us up from getting paid, and it's also going to create a lot of animosity between all those parties we showed you before. So we need to concentrate on these A's, B's, C's, and D's, and we're going to come up with solutions for each of them. The contractor did more than he was supposed to do. The contractor's pricing is too high. The contractor never updated us, and the contractor can't prove his charges. So let's start talking about the ABCDs of invoicing. I'm going to make this, instead of ABCs, ABCDs, because we want to address each of those four different categories. I'm going to lay out exactly how we're going to address them. A, agreed upon scope, what you intend to do. Remember what A was before? Contractor did more than he was supposed to do. If we have agreed upon scope with all the parties, we're never going to do more than what we were supposed to do. B is basis. How do you intend to bill? Oh, the contractor's pricing is too high. That was our B hurdle before. Well, if we tell them how we're going to be billing and we show them our pricing mechanism in our list, there's no question about what we're supposed to do. If you get agreement on these two parts of your project, you will determine your invoice, and there should not be any question about the price of your invoice because you've established the scope and you've established the basis by which you're billing. And that's usually the only two things that go into an invoice: what we did and what we're charging for everything we did. C, communication. This answers the question, the contractor never told me what was going on during the process. We need to really, really button down our communication skills and have good processes in place on the commercial side for handling them. Finally, documentation. We need to make sure we can prove everything we are doing. The documentation is the argument to counter their last argument that they can't prove anything. So we're going to document. These two pieces are going to get us paid. Let's just make sure over the next few sessions, we're really concentrating on what we're talking about as it relates to A, B, C, and D. So like I said, this is part one of a 10-part series. Over the next couple of sessions, you're going to be studying these categories in depth, and then we're going to get more involved into the invoice itself. That concludes part one of our 10-part series. Please look forward to part two, getting an agreed upon scope. Thank you so much for joining us on the Crest Network, and continued success.